The workshop was a world of ticking whispers where time itself seemed to breathe through the delicate hands of 1,000 clocks. The scent of old wood, warm candle wax, and polished brass filled the air. Shadows danced across the room as the flickering lantern light reflected off intricate gears and delicate watch faces, each one a silent witness to the passing of time. At the heart of it all, hunched over a grand wooden work table, sat Master Leon, an old watchmaker whose hands, though wrinkled with age, still moved with precision. His eyes, sharp yet weary, focused on his life's final masterpiece, a golden clock unlike any other. Its design was exquisite, crafted with delicate engravings that shimmered under the dim light. Beside him stood Elias, his young grandson, eyes wide with admiration. He had always loved his grandfather's stories, but tonight something felt different. The room felt heavier, as if time itself was holding its breath. Leon, sensing the boy's curiosity, gently turned the golden clock towards him. He ran his fingers over its surface before whispering, "This clock holds a secret, Elias. It only stops when time truly runs out." Elias furrowed his brow. "What do you mean, grandfather? Clocks stop all the time when they break." Leon chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, my boy, this clock is different. It does not break. It does not run out of power. It only stops when it must." A chill ran down Elias's spine. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, the distant toll of the village bell struck 11, a reminder that midnight was near. Leon sighed and leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in his expression. "Come, Elias, it is late. Time does not wait, and neither should you." But Elias couldn't shake the unease in his chest. As he watched his grandfather close his eyes, he glanced at the golden clock once more. It was still ticking, for now. The clockwork world of the workshop grew quieter with each passing minute. The air seemed to thicken with the weight of unspoken words, and the flickering lantern cast long shadows across the room. Master Leon, though frail and weathered by time, sat in his favorite chair beside his workbench. His hands, no longer steady, rested gently in his lap, his breathing shallow. Yet there was a stillness in his presence, a calm that seemed to hold the very essence of wisdom. Elias stood nearby, watching his grandfather with a mixture of concern and reverence. Leon had grown weaker with each passing day, but Elias hadn't expected this, the final moments, to arrive so suddenly. Leon's gaze shifted to the golden clock that lay before them on the workbench, still ticking away with its rhythmic beat. It was as if the clock had become an extension of Leon himself, alive with purpose. With a quiet, deliberate movement, Leon lifted his head and locked eyes with Elias. His voice, soft but filled with the gravity of a lifetime of experience, carried the weight of a truth only a few ever understood. "Elias, time is a treasure. but only those who respect it will truly own it. The words hung in the air between them. Elias swallowed hard, unsure how to respond, or if he could even grasp the meaning of such a heavy statement. His grandfather had always been the one to explain life's complexities through stories, but now it felt as though those stories had come to an end. Leon's chest rose and fell with each breath, weaker now, but still calm. Elias wanted to ask more questions. What did his grandfather mean by time being a treasure? How could anyone truly own it? But before he could form the words, the old man spoke again, softer this time, as if speaking to himself. We often chase time, but in doing so, we forget to live in it. Don't make that mistake, Elias. There was a long pause, a silence so profound that Elias could hear the steady ticking of the golden clock growing louder. He felt an aching sadness, a sense of inevitability creeping in. Then, with a final shallow breath, Master Leon's eyes fluttered closed, and his hands, which had spent a lifetime crafting timepieces, went still. Elias was frozen in the moment, unable to grasp the depth of what had just happened. His grandfather was gone. But then, at exactly midnight, the golden clock stopped ticking. The sound of the ticking ceased, as though the entire world had paused in that single suspended moment. The silence that followed was deafening, unnatural. Elias's heart raced. Why had the clock stopped? Was it simply a coincidence? Or was there something more? He looked at the lifeless form of his grandfather and back to the golden clock. The stillness of the moment was overwhelming. The room seemed darker, emptier, like time itself had been interrupted. Elias approached the clock hesitantly, reaching for the gears, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it. His mind raced. Why did it stop exactly when grandfather passed? Was this the secret his grandfather had alluded to? There was a profound sense of confusion mixed with an unsettling awe. The clock, his grandfather's life's work, had stopped at the exact moment Leon had passed. What did this mean? Elias couldn't help but wonder. Was his grandfather trying to tell him something? The question burned in his mind. Did time truly run out when a person's life ended? Or had the clock stopped for some other reason? Something deeper? The morning after his grandfather's passing was strangely still. The workshop, once filled with the hum of constant movement, seemed eerily silent. Elias sat at the workbench, staring at the now stopped golden clock, his mind swirling with confusion. Why had the clock stopped when grandfather passed? He felt as though a piece of something important had slipped through his fingers, and he couldn't let it go. As the hours passed, Elias finally stood up, his resolve growing stronger. He couldn't rest until he understood. What had his grandfather meant by the cryptic words? Why had the clock stopped, and why did it matter so much? His first instinct was to turn to the one place where he might find answers: his grandfather's old journals. The shelves were lined with leather bound books, their pages worn from years of use. These journals weren't just filled with notes about clocks and timepieces, they were full of life lessons and reflections. Elias carefully picked up the oldest journal, its cover cracked and faded. As he flipped through the pages, he saw his grandfather's meticulous handwriting, notes on crafting clocks, reflections on life, and little anecdotes from his past. But then, in between the technical details, Elias found something that made his heart race: a cryptic note in his grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Those who chase the past lose their future. Those who fear the future waste the present. The words seemed to pulse with meaning, and Elias felt a shiver run down his spine. What did this note mean? Was it a message meant for him? His grandfather had never been one for simple phrases, so this had to be something deeper. Chase the past, lose the future, fear the future, waste the present. Elias repeated the words over and over in his head, trying to make sense of them. Was his grandfather warning him? The more he thought about it, the more confusion and curiosity gripped him. What was he supposed to do with this knowledge? How did it connect to the golden clock? And what was the meaning of his grandfather's final lesson about time being a treasure? He needed answers, and the only way to find them was to follow the path his grandfather had left behind. Elias decided he would travel beyond the workshop, seeking out people who had known his grandfather, hoping that their experiences would reveal more about the deeper meaning of time and perhaps the purpose of the golden clock. Elias's journey led him far from the quiet village where he had grown up, through bustling streets and into unfamiliar territories, each step pulling him further from the safety of his grandfather's workshop. As he traveled, the words from the journal echoed in his mind. Those who chase the past lose their future. Those who fear the future waste the present. He was beginning to understand the gravity of his grandfather's message. But there was still something missing, something that nagged at him like an unsolved riddle. His travels eventually brought him to a distant exotic market, a place where rare goods and strange artifacts filled the air with mystery. The bustling noise of the market was alive with traders shouting their wares, the scent of spices, and the bright colors of fabrics from every corner of the world. Yet Elias wasn't here for trinkets or treasures. He was here for something far more elusive, a piece of his grandfather's past. In the midst of the market, Elias's gaze was drawn to an old, weathered stall draped in velvet cloths. Behind the counter sat a mystic merchant, a man whose dark eyes seemed to shimmer with knowledge of things beyond ordinary understanding. Elias felt an unspoken pull toward him. There was something about this merchant that suggested he knew secrets that could change lives. As Elias approached, The merchant's gaze met his, and for a brief moment it felt as though the air between them held the weight of an unspoken understanding. Without a word, the merchant beckoned Elias closer, his voice low and steady as he spoke. I knew your grandfather, Master Leon. He was a man who understood time better than most. But there are forces, young one, that even he couldn't control. Elias's heart quickened. Could this man know something about the golden clock? The merchant continued, his tone almost a whisper. I possess a rare artifact, a relic of great power, a timepiece that can rewind time for a short while. It can undo what has already been done. He paused, letting the words sink in. You could use it to go back and change the moment of your grandfather's death. You could prevent his passing. Elias stood frozen, torn between the overwhelming desire to see his grandfather alive again and the weight of the choice he was being given. A chance to undo the unchangeable? The temptation was undeniable, yet deep down, Elias knew this was more than a mere offer. It was a test, a trial that would challenge everything he had learned about time and its value. The merchant's eyes narrowed, as though reading Elias's thoughts. But beware, young one. Time is not to be trifled with. To change one moment could unravel the fabric of countless others. You may save your grandfather, but you may lose much more. Think carefully. Elias stood there, the timepiece gleaming in the merchant's hands, beckoning him to make a choice. His mind raced. What if this was the answer? What if he could save his grandfather? But then the words from the journal resurfaced in his mind. Those who chase the past lose their future. His grandfather had always taught him that time could not be controlled, that it was a gift, a treasure to be valued, not manipulated. Elias took a deep breath, and for a long moment he simply stared at the timepiece in the merchant's hand. Finally, he made his decision. Slowly, he shook his head. I cannot change the past. I must accept what has happened. The merchant nodded solemnly, as though he had expected this choice. Wise. Every moment has its value, even loss. It is through loss that we learn to cherish what remains. With a sense of finality, Elias turned away from the merchant, the weight of the decision heavy on his chest. As he walked away, the timepiece still in the merchant's hand, Elias realized that every moment, even the painful ones, was part of the larger tapestry of life. The lesson was clear. Time was not to be controlled or avoided, but embraced and cherished. Elias returned to his grandfather's workshop with the weight of his journey behind him, his heart full of understanding and his mind clear. The world outside had been full of distractions, mystic merchants, tempting offers, and paths that seemed to promise answers. But in the end, Elias knew that the true lesson had always been here, in this familiar, quiet space. The lesson was never about trying to change the past or control the future. It was about embracing the present and the precious moments that made up a life. As he stepped back into the workshop, the air felt different. It was the same room, the same workbench, the same golden clock sitting there, stopped at midnight. But Elias no longer saw it as a mysterious puzzle or a painful reminder. He saw it as a symbol of the time that had passed, the moments that had been lived, and the legacy that remained. With a quiet, determined resolve, Elias moved to the workbench. He knew what he had to do. He would no longer live in the shadow of regret or fear, trying to undo what had already been done. His grandfather's legacy was not just about creating beautiful clocks. It was about making every moment count, whether it was filled with joy or sorrow, triumph or loss. Elias sat at the workbench, his hands steady and sure, as he began to work on the golden clock. With great care, he restarted it, gently turning the gears and resetting the hands. As the final click sounded, the clock's hands moved once more, the soft ticking echoing throughout the room. The sound of time moving again filled Elias with a deep sense of peace. But this time, it was different. Elias wasn't afraid of time anymore. He had embraced it, not as something to be controlled or feared, but as something to be cherished, as something that was fleeting but precious. The clock ticked, and for the first time in his life, Elias felt free from the burden of trying to make time stand still. He understood now that every second had its own value, and it was his responsibility to make the most of each one. Standing up from the workbench, Elias looked around at the workshop, his grandfather's legacy, and knew it was time to continue that legacy. He would carry the torch, not by recreating the past, but by creating something new in the present. With a deep breath, he hung a sign above the door, a simple yet powerful message: make every moment count. Elias didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He would no longer waste time chasing the past or fearing what was to come. He would live fully in the present, cherishing the moments that made life worth living. The ticking clock, the same clock that had once seemed like a reminder of loss, now symbolized something much more important: purpose, growth, and the beauty of time well spent. Chapter 6: Closing Shot. The Emotional Impact. The workshop was peaceful now, quiet except for the steady tick-tick-tick of the golden clock, which had once been still but now hummed with life again. Elias sat at his workbench, surrounded by the tools his grandfather had used, the shelves filled with unfinished clocks, and the walls adorned with designs that spoke to his past and future. The sign above the door, "Make every moment count," caught the light. Its simple yet profound message, a reflection of the life Elias had chosen to live. For the first time, Elias felt the weight of time in the most beautiful way. He was no longer burdened by the ticking of the clock as a reminder of what was lost, but rather as a celebration of what was possible, of all the moments he could still create. He had embraced his purpose, and in doing so, he had found peace, not in the absence of time, but in the way it unfolded before him, moment by precious moment. Just as Elias leaned back, savoring this new sense of purpose, the soft creak of the door broke the silence. A young child, no older than 6 or 7, stepped inside, eyes wide with curiosity. His small feet padded across the floor, drawn by the gleaming golden clock that sat on the workbench, its hands ticking steadily. Elias smiled warmly, the kind of smile that reflected not just kindness, but a deeper understanding, an appreciation for this moment. He knew this was no coincidence. The child's wide eyes, filled with wonder, reminded him of his own youthful curiosity, the curiosity that had driven him to search for meaning, to understand time and what it truly meant. "What's that?" the child asked, pointing to the golden clock, his voice full of innocent wonder. Elias leaned forward, his eyes softening as he gazed at the clock and then at the child. He had learned so much, and now it was time to share the wisdom his grandfather had passed on to him. The cycle of learning, living, and sharing was beginning anew. "That clock," Elias began, his voice steady but filled with warmth, "was made to remind us that every moment is a gift. We don't control time, but we can choose how to spend it. It's not about chasing the past or fearing the future, but about making the most of today." The child blinked, processing the words, and Elias could see the spark of curiosity flicker in the young eyes. It was a spark that had once burned in him, a spark that was now being passed forward. The camera slowly zooms in on the golden clock, its hands ticking, moving forward with purpose. The sound of the ticking becomes more pronounced, symbolizing not just the passage of time, but the new beginning that Elias has embraced. The clock, no longer a symbol of loss, now stood as a symbol of purpose, growth, and the beauty of each fleeting moment. As the camera pulls back, Elias watches the child with a knowing smile. The cycle continues. Wisdom is passed from one generation to the next, each person making their mark on time in their own way, cherishing it and making it count. The golden clock ticks on, and the message is clear. Time is fleeting, but it's how we use it that gives it meaning. Elias had found peace in the present, and with that, he had found his purpose. Now it was his turn to pass on that wisdom to others.